Welcome, everyone. I'm Mariquita Solis, the live stream host of all-creatures.org. All-creatures.org was founded in 1998 and is a leading resource for faith-based animal rights veganism. Led by Executive Director Tams Nicholson, we provide free resources for people seeking to live compassionately towards all creatures. Our extensive library includes vegan sermons and commentaries, animal rights strategies, action alerts, events, and works by various vegan authors. We also sponsor websites for animal rights organizations. Our mission is to unite compassionate individuals worldwide who honor the dignity of all living creatures. Today, we're excited to welcome Janet, known as Jay O'Shea. Jay is the author of the books Risk, Failure, Play, What Dance Reveals About Martial Arts Training, and At Home in the World, Bharata Natyam on the global stage. She's currently writing a book on the structure of activism entitled Bodies on the Line, Physicality, Emotion, and Social Justice, which focuses on utility cycling advocacy, border solidarity efforts, and farmed animal rescue. She's also written book chapters and articles on veganism, animal rights, and environmentalism. She is part of the teaching team for the freshman cluster course, Food as a Lens for the Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. She's on the advisory board of Climate Diet and is an incoming board member of New Roots Institute. She is the professor and chair of the Department of World Arts and Culture's Dance at UCLA. So I'm excited to talk to Jay because she is, like I am, a climate healer, and we have been together in person. I mean, a lot of times my guests I haven't met in person, but I was honored to meet Jay in Arizona last year, and she's so graceful and so wise and eloquent. So welcome, Jay. Thanks for joining us on this show today.
Thanks, Mariquita. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. We have, I know you have so much going on, and we have a lot of similar things in our field. So let's jump right in. And I welcome everyone to let us know where you're joining from. If you're watching now or on the replay, please let us know and get your questions. If you have any for Jay, we'll take those as well. So, Jay, how did you learn about veganism, and tell us about how that came to be, your veganism?
Sure. It's a kind of long and convoluted story, and I will give you the redux, but I'll hit the main points because I think the fact of it being a long and convoluted story is actually kind of illustrative of many people's journey to veganism. I grew up in a working class Irish American household in suburbs of New York City, and my family's eating habits were very meat based, kind of meat and refined grain, kind of not a lot of fresh vegetables. And also, it was the 1970s, so it was kind of the era of convenience foods, and it was when the industrialization, as I know, the industrialization of our food system was taking off. So it wasn't a very plant forward household, but I never liked meat. And when I was a child, I refused to eat it. And it wasn't even an animal ethics thing. I don't even know if I made the connection. I just was disgusted by it. Um, so my parents were really quite puzzled by this. And then when I was a teenager, I started learning about vegetarianism. And this happened through a number of outlets. One was that I have a much older brother, and he had brought home these vegetarian cookbooks, and they were kind of from the sort of, for lack of a better descriptor, from the like hippie era of the late 60s, when there was this real interest in vegetarianism. So I started reading these cookbooks, and my brother actually taught me and my siblings how to make whole wheat pizza. And so I became very interested in vegetarianism. And at first, I have to say, it was a pretty superficial interest. It was just like, oh, this seems alternative, you know. But then I started researching because even then as a teenager, I loved research. So I started researching everything I could about vegetarianism. And I kind of like moved into almost like incidental veganism. And I sort of understood in the abstract that milk and eggs and wool, like that they came from animal exploitation. But I didn't really understand that these are the same industry. Like that point really didn't land. So I kind of just considered myself an ethical vegetarian. And when I was in college and graduate school, I had opportunities to travel for research. I went to South India for education and research. And then in grad school, I spent a little bit of time in the Philippines. And so I became a little more flexible about my vegetarianism. Like when I was in India, I consumed dairy, and when I was in the Philippines, I consumed some fish. Um, and so I kind of moved in and out between vegetarianism, sort of being plant based, being pesco vegetarian, um, and that all sort of changed in the early 2010s. My family and I, my immediate family and I, made a road trip to Oregon, and it was for the December holidays, and we were sort of driving. My daughter was very young then, and we were driving up through Northern California, and my partner was talking about how um, when he was a child, he would go to Mount Shasta, to the city of Mount Shasta, and there would be all this snow, and we were kind of talking it up for our daughter, and then we got there, and there was no snow. And it was this kind of, and we found a little patch of snow behind the dumpster of a restaurant, and we were like horrified. Um, and so we were just, hit by the realities of the climate crisis. And at the same time, we happened to go to Powell's bookstore shortly thereafter. We happened to go to Powell's bookstore, and I stumbled on Jonathan Safran Foer's Eating Animals. And he makes the connection so clearly that the meat, dairy, and egg industries are literally the same industry. They're not just like conceptually connected, they're literally the same thing. And when that landed, I was like, that's it. I'm going vegan. And it was right in time for a New Year's resolution. And that was like in 2012, around 2012, I think. And so it was like that was, then I just didn't turn back. It all fell into place.
Well, that's a great story. And your family, then, what did they think? Did they support you, or did they think this was crazy?
Oh, my family of origin thought that my parents in particular thought it was so alien. It was just like, this is crazy. Like you can't do that. You can't just like become vegetarian. And it was all the classic kind of thing, like, oh well, there's just a little bit of meat in this, or oh, you could can you just pick out the meat. And so I actually just did a lot of cooking for myself, when I was a teenager. My siblings were always quite supportive. And so I think they sort of understood it, and they have continued to be very supportive. Um, and then my family, as in my partner and child, actually have sort of come along with me on this journey. Of course, it would have been too simple had we all gone vegan at once. Like it didn't play out like that. It was uh, my daughter. We had been raising her vegetarian just because we wanted it to be her choice. And then when she was like two, as toddlers do, she went through a contrarian phase. So she was like, I want to eat meat. I was like, fine, you can eat meat at preschool. Then when we made this trip to Oregon, I went vegan. Um, she went vegetarian. She was only like 3, but she was like, I want to go vegetarian. And then my partner went pescatarian. So we're still all had different dietary patterns, but then we eventually all lined up and we're all vegan now.
I love that, but it is so true. I mean, it just points out everyone's on their own journey, and it's not a linear journey. No matter how we want to force someone into a straight path, it's not like that. People are exploring on their own, and so to be respectful of that is very important.
Yeah, very much so. And I heard something. on, I think it was the Our Hen House podcast, and I think it was from many years ago. I don't even know how I stumbled on this, but I thought it was so insightful. Um, where they were talking about how there's this idea that statistically, um, people try veganism and then they fail. And so, like, there's this received wisdom idea that, like, oh, well, most people who like try to become vegan, they fail. So why bother even trying? And what Jasmine and Marianne were talking about is that, in fact, this is not necessarily recidivism, it's people backsliding on the way to eventually becoming vegan, because people often try many times before they actually succeed. It's like that Mark Twain thing where he was like, quitting smoking is the easiest thing in the world. I've done it dozens of times. But people do that. They try to quit smoking and they fail and they fail and they fail, and eventually they succeed. So I think it's important, right, to recognize that people are on their own journeys, and also sometimes that it takes a number of exposures to an idea for it to stick. It takes a number of attempts to shifting our habits for it to stick, and that's part of the process.
Very true. Well, let's talk a little bit about your books, Jay, and your dance. Tell me about that beautiful book that I saw on dance. I mean, what beautiful colors and the political aspects in this dance from India.
Sure. Okay. That's going way back into my career trajectory, but that's great. I'm happy to do it. I trained as a dancer. I started out with training in contemporary, like Western contemporary dance, ballet, that kind of thing. And then when I went to college, I started training in Bharata Natyam because I went to Wesleyan University, which has this incredible ethnomusicology program and also has this really special relationship to South Indian classical dance and music. In that a real luminary of the Bharatanatyam field named Bala Saraswati was an artist in residence there, and her two brothers were musicians, and they were adjunct faculty at Wesleyan. So I just took this Bharatanatyam class, and then I was a dance and anthropology major, and I was very interested in this idea of dance as a social practice and as a cultural practice. And I wanted to do field work. So I applied for this small grant and I got to go to South India for a month. And it was really interesting because I had been training in this one um, highly specialized sub style almost of dance. And it was a very understated version of Bharatanatyam. It was um, very almost kind of minimalist. I mean, I thought that's what this dance form was. And I got to, uh, it was called Madras then, it's called Chennai now, South India. And I realized very quickly from the performances I was seeing, from the conversations I was having with people, that Bharatanatyam was actually a very large field with very different interpretations of the dance, of its aesthetics, and also of its history. And people were creating dance and performing dance that looked very different, and yet they were calling it traditional and they were calling it classical. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. People have these totally different interpretations of what this dance form is. They're all calling it traditional, they're all calling it classical. They must have very different definitions of what those words mean. And so I was like, oh, that is very interesting from an intellectual standpoint. And so I was like, okay. So that stuck with me. I actually wrote a thesis on dance technique and how dance technique creates a particular kind of bodily self. It creates a certain kind of like musculature, a certain kind of physicality. But the thing about the interpretation of tradition stayed with me. And I was like, so if you're interpreting tradition in different ways, it kind of means you're interpreting history in different ways. It's interesting. Kind of, it just sort of stayed in the back of my mind. And then I continued to train in Bharatanatyam, and I performed quite a bit, particularly in the United States. And then I applied for a performing artist fellowship. And so I thought I was going to India as a performing artist to train and to perform. And I was like, that's what it's going to be. That's what I'm doing. I was going for 9 months. And I showed up, and there were some practical setbacks. My dance teacher had moved out of her home. She was living in an apartment, so she didn't have a dance studio anymore. So we were still doing classes, but they were like in her living room. So it was a very different kind of thing. She wasn't as available, as I had hoped. I was able to see a lot of performances. And then I was also able to travel around southern India. I had more time. And I had a grant, so I was able to hire a research assistant. And so then I started like, oh, I was like, oh, this is really interesting because now I'm really meeting and talking to these people who have these different understandings um, of classicism. And indeed, they were rooted in some very different understandings of history and what the source materials are for the dance and where those source materials come from. And while I was away, I actually applied to go back to graduate school. And I was like, okay, this is very interesting. And it kind of brought me to this kind of crisis a little bit because I was so invested in this one version of history, and that's what I was trained in. Um, and also at the same time, I really believed in this idea that like change is generally a good thing. And a variety of interpretations is a healthy thing. So I was like, this is a tension. Kind of almost pushed me to a little bit of a crisis point of like, okay, so where am I going with this? And I was like, okay, well, one way of addressing this is to go to graduate school and to like turn this into an intellectual problem to think through. Which I ended up pursuing, and that ended up being very interesting, actually. And then that's where the book came out of, is this exploration of like, well, if you start to interpret history in different ways and you start to look at different source materials for your practice, then that opens up to politics, and it opens up to how you're thinking about the relationship to language, to the region, to the nation, to gender, to caste and class, and so on.
Yeah, it's amazing how the interwovenness of things is really underlying, in that it's such great depth that we often don't see all the different aspects of just one simple thing that we're looking at. Like a dance, you wouldn't understand. Might not see everything, all the histories and the interpretations and what it means to different people. You might just think this is very straightforward. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, for
BJ
sure.
is here.
Oh, great. Hi, BJ. Oh, the book is called At Home in the World, Bharata Natyam on the Global Stage.
And where can we get it?
Well, it was published by Wesleyan University Press. And so you can get a copy of it from the university. I think it's called the University Presses of New England. It's also available through online retailers. Bookshop.org is one that I would really give a shout out to. And better yet, you can also ask your local library to get a copy of it.
Well, it's beautiful. It really made me think when I was taking a look at it. So let's talk a little bit about climate healers and Dr. Silas Rao. How did you become involved with climate healers? When did you first hear about climate healers? And BJ, Rebecca Allen, is another climate healer. So when did that journey start?
So I first heard about climate healers. I was listening to a podcast interview, and I can't remember who it was with. I believe it was on, it might have been on Rip Esselstyn's podcast, or maybe on the Exam Room, the podcast associated with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. But the person being interviewed, I feel like it was like maybe Brenda Davis, the nutritionist, or it was somebody like that who just said something about the climate healers, like, and then there's this organization, the climate healers. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Like that idea that like treating the climate crisis as not simply a technological problem, but as a social and cultural and indeed a kind of spiritual problem. I was like, that's really interesting because I had been circling around this idea myself for quite a long time, just in my thinking of like, um, so much of how we talk about the climate crisis is technological and is that we need to green our energy system, which of course we do. And we need to kind of clean up our food system, which of course we do. Um, but it's not only a technical problem. It can't be solved through technological means alone because it's also so tied to a, a kind of an investment in overconsumption in various kinds of ways and a sort of alienation from our environment and from each other. So when I heard about climate healers, I was like, oh, this is very interesting. And then when I started reading about the work that Dr. Silas Rao is doing about highlighting the impact that animal agriculture is having on the environment and about his history of working with Al Gore and with the kind of resistance that a lot of mainstream environmental organizations have to even talking about the impact of animal agriculture. It really fit with like some of the research I had been doing. I hosted a screening of Cowspiracy like back before they had their distribution deal. Actually, right after that trip to Oregon, I was doing all this research about why isn't anyone talking about this, and then I was like, oh, Cowspiracy. Someone did a documentary. That's great. I'm gonna host a screening at UCLA, and the work that Climate Healers was doing is again very much in that vein, like Cowspiracy. And so yeah, I just sort of started following the work that Climate Healers was doing. And then I actually reached out to Dr. Rao maybe about a year ago, just saying about the vegan land movement, actually, because I'm also a huge fan of the vegan land movement. And I was like, who might be interested in the vegan land movement is Climate Healers. So I just sent an email to Dr. Rao, not expecting him to answer, and just saying, hey, do you know about this organization? And is this something that maybe your organization might want to feature at one of your VCOPs? And then he wrote back to me and said, he wrote back to me right away, which was so gracious. And then was like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you. And would you like to speak at VCOP? Like, I've seen your TED Talk and I saw, some of the other stuff you've done. And would you be interested in speaking? So, yeah. And then that's how I ended up connecting to you all in a personal kind of way, as opposed to just sort of reading your newsletters and seeing what you all post on social media.
Right. Yeah, that's very exciting. Dr. Rao is really making a difference, and he's so wise and so calm and very. He just has such an elegance about him, and at the urgency. It's not like a frantic or like we're going down. Where it's more. He's very refined and very graceful about how he spreads the message, and it's very introspective and careful to not turn people off, but to be very diplomatic about sharing this message, yet with passion and with the urgency that needs to be shared. And that's it can be a tricky walk to do that in the way that he does it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, because on the one hand, we need to take action immediately. On the other hand, the whole excess of busyness, the whole kind of fast paced style of living is what got us into this mess, is part of what's gotten us into this mess in the first place. The idea that like we have to use the most rapid form of transit possible. We have to eat convenience food because we don't have time to cook. We have to use the throwaway packaging. We exist in this state of stress such that we don't even have time to think about it when we see that the very planet that sustains us is being destroyed. So there's a need for slow thought and fast action at once. And so I think that is so important to be able to maintain that balance.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So many people don't have they don't even go outside. They don't connect with nature, and so I mean, if you're not connecting with nature, why would you care about nature? Because it's not important to you. So let's talk. So let me go to BJ's a couple of things. She wanted you to say a few words about the book.
Oh, okay. About At Home in the World, or
About the I can't say it.
uh,
The one,
yeah, the Bharata Natyam book? Oh,
yes.
okay. Well, as I was saying earlier, it's it comes out of this research where I was looking at this idea that there are many different interpretations of what this dance form is and what it should be and what its aesthetic should be like. And those different interpretations are, most of them are rooted in a sense of history. And so that means that history is being defined in different ways. And as soon as you start to define history in different ways, like that's sort of inherently political, but particularly for a dance form located in India, which is a post-colonial society, a very diverse, multicultural post-colonial society where regional diversity has to be managed and has been managed in different ways, and also in a society where gender gender norms, and also where the status of women was a source of debate starting in the 19th century, and particularly as it relates to dance. And there was a lot of colonial criticism of women performers in India. So the book is set up based around these series of debates, like the nation versus the region, and the interpretations of Bharatanatyam that focus on its association with the nation state, and with the Sanskrit language versus associations with southern India and the Tamil and Telugu languages. There's a chapter that focuses on gender, and on the representation of women. Um, I also talk about the dance's relationship to the local, to local, uh, both like literally local spaces, but also kind of local kind of relationships, and that being in tension with its global circulation, which goes back to at least the early 19th century. So that's how the book is structured.
Well, it looks very interesting. I'm always interested in the the cultural aspects. I mean, and women and being a woman. I mean, the treatment of women in society. So the underlying treatment of women in society in different areas. So, all right. So, um, because I studied feminine empowerment coaching, so seeing the repression of women, shame, and how it can just cripple us, and having to live under that of being yourself and being criticized. I mean, this is very sad to say. A friend of mine the other day was talking about her turkey neck, and it really hurt me to hear that. Um, as a woman, as a woman that is really trying to help other women um, not fall under society's what they've defined us to be, and I mean, also to be graceful with my friend who was saying that it's tricky, and as a performer in dance, to be watched and to be judged. And I remember reading a book called Little Girls in Pretty Boxes, and this was 30 years ago maybe, about little ballerinas, and I think it was about anorexia and the pressure they were under. So I mean, it's very interesting for me about all of this
Yeah,
cultural.
that's actually where my, I guess, academic journey in relation to dance kind of started, was looking at body image. And it I was really struck by how, like, in ballet, there's that idea that for women to dance, they have to be extremely slender. They have to be muscular enough to do the dance, but no excess musculature beyond that. Like the incredibly muscular thighs and the incredibly skinny arms is like the classic kind of ballerina body. And they have to be very light, and everything has to be upward. And I was so struck with Bharatanatyam, my, like, 19, 20-year-old self was just like, these are strong, curvaceous women doing this dance form. And it's totally acceptable for women to dance and to have these substantial physiques. The dance is very grounded. It's very powerful. There's a lot of like uh, strong footwork in it. It's very angular. There's like angles through the body. It's not about lines through the body. Um, so that's where I started, was like, oh, this is incredible, this is amazing that it's possible to be a dancer and to not have to be incredibly skinny. um and then I was looking at like all the ways in which those different aesthetics um are rooted in the dance form itself, in the technique. You know, and then when I worked on this, worked on Bharata Natyam for my PhD and for my book, it got a little more complicated through reference to history, because the dance form had been practiced by courtesans, and they were women who had relative social power. They could read and write, they could travel freely in the world, they controlled their own finances, but they were also still within the court system, kind of under the jurisdiction of the king, um, and and the wealth that they did have was dependent on them remaining in service to either the temple or the king. And they also were expected to entertain very lavishly, so it wasn't really possible to generate generational wealth. But at the same time, there were these certain freedoms, particularly in relation to like upper class, like elite women who are expected to be within the home, who are typically illiterate, and that kind of thing. And so it was very complex. It wasn't like, oh, this is completely emancipatory, but it's also, oh, these women were not completely subjugated either. Um, but there was a real collision of values when British colonialists came in. And the like sort of 19th century British idea of women as like the angels in the home, the separation of spheres ideology. And to them, it was like, oh, this is just outrageous. They called the dancers prostitutes. Interestingly, they did admit, they were like, well, also, in England, of course, dance is also performed by prostitutes, quote unquote, but they don't have a place in polite society, so it's different. you know so it's very complicated in terms of gender, and that's actually very really interesting to me. It's not something that, oh, it was perfect then, the way it was done in India was perfect, and it's also not like, oh, in India these women were so subjugated. Women navigated through the social structures that were there, and used the agency that they had.
Well, that's fascinating. So we should all definitely get that book. Definitely. And it's very intriguing to look at women and how we've accomplished. I mean, how we've gotten to where we are, and the backsliding, and how we will continue to move forward no matter what. So, and now we have BJ saying, tell us about what's going on with the vegan land movement and the vegan land movement. So I will tell you a little bit about where my role was in that. In as a climate healer, I was asked, to contact the vegan land movement um, because of your recommendation. So I reached out to the vegan land movement to see if they would be a guest on the VCOP, on the Vegan Convergence of the People, one of our recent events. Well, they are in the Highlands, in the Scottish Highlands. They're very busy, and they are working to buy out land that is being used for animal agriculture, and to save this land from human gain. So unfortunately, they were not able to come on to our event, our Vegan Convergence of the People, at that time. So we, a few of us, made a presentation, and it went really well. I mean, one of the Vegan Land Movement, one of the team members was watching and trying to get on, but because of the sketchy signal at that time, wasn't able to. But nevertheless, so a group of us formed afterwards, including myself and Jay, to work together to see if we can implement this in other countries. So I'd love for you to add on to that, Jay, what's going on with us now.
Sure. Yeah. So I can't remember how I actually found out initially about the vegan land movement. I think I was researching vegan rewilding. And you know how that there's that thing where you come up with an idea and you're like, oh, wow, this is an amazing idea. Like, why hasn't anyone else thought of it? And then you realize, like, oh yes, a whole bunch of people have come up with it. And it's almost like this parallel development thing that all these people are having the same idea at the same time, sometimes in exchange with each other, but sometimes not. And so that kind of happened with vegan land movement, where I was doing research on this and then I found what they were doing. I was like, this is amazing. And it's so important, particularly in the UK. I used to live in the UK. I used to live in London, and whenever I would take the train, like anywhere, I'd always be like, "Oh, this is so beautiful! All these rolling hills, all these open spaces." And it didn't occur to me till many years later that those are not natural spaces. That's all land that had been deforested for animal agriculture. And so those sort of rolling hills with the stone walls and everything it's all grazing land. And the UK is actually has the least biodiversity of any developed nation, any global North nation, because of all this, because it's an island and because it's been used for grazing for so long. So vegan land movement, I was just like, this is absolutely amazing. They're buying out land that has been really degraded, and then they're turning it back to nature. I mean, it's just incredible. They're planting native species, and then they're just allowing nature to take over. And they are able to create like these legal trusts so that it will belong to nature in perpetuity, which is just wonderful.
It
And
is.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and just that idea, like that's part of what they're talking about is like, how do we do this in other countries, right? And so that seems like such an important part of it too, is to try to figure out a way that there can be a vegan land movement in many countries worldwide, recognizing that the natural environment is different, that the presence of invasive species is going to be different, the status of native species is going to be different, and the legal requirements are going to be different.
Right. And so if somebody's watching and would like to get on board with us, we meet every week. Um, as and we'd love for you, if you're interested or you have any tips for us, any because we're wanting to learn and see how we can implement this in other countries so we can save the land. That it's just, oh my gosh, I mean, people don't realize how much land has been destroyed by animal agriculture. I sometimes I ask my friends that are not vegan, and they will say maybe 5%. They don't understand, and I mean, to it's hard to say 50% and have them really believe it. I feel like it's almost like they don't believe it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around until you really understand um, what goes on in animal agriculture and how it, like the nature of the feed conversion ratio. Because I think unless you really go out of your way to get this information, you're not going to receive it. Right. It's not widely available. It's not there's vested interests, there's vested economic interests in preventing you from getting this information. So recognizing that you have to put a lot more into an animal than you get out of it is really crucial. And I think it's not something, I mean, most people who are eating animals don't want to think about the fact that that's what they're doing. And they don't want to think about the fact that this is a living, breathing, cogitating, moving being. And to support all that, it takes all these resources. And that either requires monocropping or it requires grazing land.
You're right, and the amount of water is shocking. I mean, I have a friend that has done work at the factory farms, and I mean, saying how the amount of water they use in a day could, I mean, is enough equivalent to a small city, which is very frightening.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. It's mind-boggling.
well, like, so this can be very frightening to people and sad to new vegans. What would you say to a new vegan that feels depressed and feels overwhelmed by these things?
Um, I would say a couple of different things. One is to get social support, because that's the biggest that's the biggest stumbling block for vegans, is the lack of social support. There's really interesting research that's done by Faunalytics, or Faunalytics might have compiled it, but basically, going back to that idea of like recidivism or like multiple attempts at veganism, basically the reason why people backslide is a lack of social support. But I think that's also part of the reason why new vegans feel so disheartened, is that they, you only see something when you see it, right? And then once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's not just true of veganism. That's why structural violence happens, is because it's obscured. And then we wake up and we see it, and then we're like, why isn't everybody outraged by this? But it's because they don't see it. Um, So I think social support is really important, like talking to people who do understand where you're coming from. And then I think also getting you involved in some kind of activist effort. Like I think individual veganism is great, but I think it's really important to recognize this is a social movement. It's a social justice movement. It's a movement to reform our food system, to make it kinder to animals, to humans, to make it more gentle on the environment. And veganism is part of that, or following a plant-based diet is part of that. But that's not where it ends. That's where it begins. And so getting involved in justice campaigns, for the animals, for the workers, for the planet, I think is the best antidote to despair.
I think you're right too. And let me ask you this about being on campus and with the youth. Do you feel like they're more open-minded, or what are some of the things they say to you? I mean, have you ever kind of had someone who had a real breakthrough after talking to you?
Um, that's interesting, because I don't know. I mean, I don't like conduct research
Mhm.
with young people or with college students. I mean, some of my colleagues have. They've done like scientific studies where like the students take the food cluster course, and then they talk about, have they reduced their meat consumption? Have they reduced their consumption, particularly of ruminant animals? And it does seem to work. I mean, that the research does show that like this kind of education works. Um, for me, because I haven't really been involved in that, I can't really say for sure that like, oh yes, this is what I
Mhm.
know for sure. What I do know is that after taking the food cluster course, individual students have made major changes in their lives, specifically towards activism. So, a few of our students have organized something called the plant. I think it's called like the Plant Forward Futures, um, where they look at careers in um, sectors that are involved in, for example, Mercy for Animals Transformation Project, which is about taking helping out farmers who want to move out of animal agriculture, or they've also been looking into like careers in developing cell-based meats, careers in terms of the non-profit sectors, in terms of academia. So they put together like these series of panels on kind of professionalizing their interest in animal ethics. So that's really great. A group of students started a veg fest on campus, and at least one of those students was involved in um, the food cluster. Um, Students have also become affiliated with the New Roots Institute, where they train fellows to be humane educators, where they educate people about the environmental impact of animal agriculture, as well as its impact on frontline communities, on the animals. So this is more like anecdotal evidence, but it's also kind of descriptive and interesting. I think it does show that, like, that process, the part of it that I was just talking about, of you only see something when you see it. The flip side of it is sometimes when people see it, it really does change their lives, and it changes the trajectory of their lives.
Yeah, it does. And everything makes a difference. I mean, we have to know that we are making a difference and people are watching, whether saying it or not. They are watching. So,
Yeah, for sure. Right. And sometimes it can take hearing something many times for it to land. right? So
Yeah,
that's it.
I mean, just like y'all's journey.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so I just want to remind everyone to make sure to visit us at www.all-creatures.org and help support this program. And make sure you hit subscribe and like. Help support this program and others by making a one-time or reoccurring donation of any amount. I want to be mindful of your time, Jay, because I know that you have a lot going on. And where, just tell us real quick where you're going to be doing in the next few weeks.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, you talked about my new book project, Bodies on the Line. That includes research on border solidarity efforts, as well as mobility justice and farmed animal rescue. And so, I'm going to be spending the next week and change in Arizona. I'm working on something called the Migrant Trail, which is a 75-mile hike through the Sonoran Desert that is a protest against border militarization. And it commemorates the lives lost in the desert, people who've tried to migrate in a clandestine manner because they couldn't access the U.S. through safe ports of entry. So this has been going on for 20 years since the deaths in the desert started increasing dramatically in the early 2000s. And this will be my third year participating.
Wow, well, you are doing so much. I'm very impressed and at your knowledge, at everything you've done. You're being, I mean, you're writing books and you're taking action, and you have such a grounded force about you, Jay, and very, you know you know where you stand, and I love it. It's very inspirational.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. I
Yes.
appreciate all the work that you're doing with allcreatures.org. It's
Well,
really
thank
wonderful.
you. Yes, All Creatures is really working hard to make sure we get the word out for all these campaigns that we can support and activist events and everyone. You know, if you're shy, if you're scared, I mean, just do the best you can, right? Just being a vegan. I mean, is showing, you know, people are watching you eat, and then just take little steps to get there, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
it's a journey, like we've been saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. And so, where can everyone find you, Jay?
So I don't have a huge online presence, but I do have a website, which is under my full name, janetoshea.com. As we've been talking about, I have two single authored books out, At Home in the World and Risk, Failure, Play. And both of those can be found through all online retailers. And I will again make a pitch for bookshop.org, which is an online retailer, but that gives money towards brick and mortar bookshops. And I will also make a pitch for your local library. So if your local library doesn't have those books, please consider asking them to order them. I also have chapters in a couple of books, and I might give a little shout out to. There's an edited volume called Peddling Resistance, Veganism and Cycling, that was edited by Carol J. Adams, the absolutely luminary ecofeminist and animal rights author, and Michael Wise, who's a social historian. And then there's another book called Politics as Public Art that I have a piece in that's actually about the Red Brigade, Extinction Rebellion's Red Brigade. And that's also an anthology that looks at different aesthetic approaches to politics and protest.
Wonderful. Well, I need to put my thinking cap on and look at these books, definitely. So, you've done so much. I'm just honored that you came on the show, and I'm excited that we're part of the Vegan Land Movement team of Climate Healers. So, anybody that's watching and wants to jump on that team, reach out to us at Climate Healers. You can reach out to me or Jay, and we'll help you get on there. We need help to save our lands. So,
Indeed.
all right. Well, thank you, everyone, BJ, and everyone else that is watching on the replay or watching behind the scenes. And thank you so much, Jay. And I will be seeing you soon, and I'll be seeing everyone here next week.
Great. Thank you so much,
So,
Raikita. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yes, it's been wonderful. Bye, everyone.
Bye.